It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
You know, a doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
You live in a spaceship, dear. So?
Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to episode 263 of Science on Top. Today is Sunday the 7th of May 2017. I'm Ed Brown and joining me today, Dr. Shane Joseph.
G'day.
And Penny Dumsday.
Hi.
And on today's show we'll be talking about fake deaths from dragonflies and extracting DNA from dirt. But first, over the past few weeks, social media has been abuzz with people posting articles about a US study that purports to show a link between artificially sweetened drinks and elevated risks of stroke and dementia. Of course, the bastion of rigorous, definitely not copied from the press release journalism, the Daily Mail, was keen to warn readers that diet drinks triple your risk of stroke and dementia. But even the failing New York Times proclaimed diet sodas are tied to dementia and stroke. So Penny, can, as the Sun put it, just one Diet Coke a day triple the risk of a deadly stroke?
Well, looking into it, it seems not, which
Correct.
is a relief for me because I think like many of us, I have wrestled with the question of is it better to have the diet drinks or the sugar-laden drinks, and come to the conclusion that it's probably better to have water, but I'm going to have whatever the hell drink I want anyway.
Exactly.
Anyway. But yeah, so this study was an observational study looking for associations, and they used quite a large data set. But I think the key point here is that they did find an association between having a stroke or dementia or having diet drinks. However, there's a couple of reasons so that we don't actually need to worry so much about diet drinks. And one is that it is just an association. There's no causal mechanism. Like, I mean, obviously a lot of people go, oh, big scary chemicals. That must be why, but that's not so. But for example, if you take into account the effect of diabetes in the stats, and this is looking at the data in the paper rather than the sort of the press releases. And even I think apparently the abstract and conclusion was somewhat misleading, perhaps. But for example, so if you look at and you factor in diabetes, then there's a risk of drinking soft drink disappears. It's not there. So diabetes perhaps is more likely to cause dementia. And there's another thing in which that even if there was this strong association, it could be that people who are, for example, obese or unhealthy in another way that is shown to increase the risk of stroke, then turn to drinking diet drinks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thus meaning that, you are more likely to perhaps have a stroke if you drink diet drinks, but you're also more likely to drink diet drinks perhaps, and look, I don't know, if you are aware that you're at risk of stroke because of being overweight and are attempting to lose weight. So it's not a very simple kind of clear-cut thing. So like many of these sort of big scare studies, I think the last one that really knocked me about, in my heart of hearts was the one about barbecued meat.
Yes.
Bacon, was it?
Yes.
I was like, no, you can't take that away from me. And again, I think you'll pry my Diet Coke out of my cold, dead, and undemented hands.
The other thing with this, of course, it's based on admittedly a large survey, but it's a self-reported survey, which we've talked about before. They're notorious for being, people forget, or I think it was a Diet Coke, but I can't remember if it was a sugary Coke or not. They're not reliable.
It probably was a Diet Coke because now I've had a stroke and it must have been something that caused it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it didn't triple your risk, as the Daily Mail said. It had I think 3% had a stroke and 5% developed dementia after 10 years after this survey was taken. So it doesn't dramatically increase your risk of those. It's a small increase if it is actually a correlation. But It's one of those things. It's an easy headline. It's an easy scare tactic to get people to click your link and to start to worry. And everyone's already primed to think that there's something wrong with the chemicals in these diet drinks. So keep drinking as you normally would, but maybe in moderation, and maybe stick to water more often than not.
Yeah.
All right, Shane. Humans produced about 311 million tonnes of plastic each year, and that number is predicted to double in the next 20 years. But an accidental discovery from a Spanish bee scientist, a scientist who is Spanish, not a scientist who studies Spanish bees. Anyway, a bee scientist points to some caterpillars that might help break plastic down. This is about like an enzyme that it produces, is it?
Yeah, it is an enzyme, apparently. The discovery of this was actually quite hilarious. As Federica Bertoncini, who's has a backyard beehive, as you do. Of
course.
And she apparently there's a kind of a worm that lives in beehives, which is probably quite bad for bees. It basically eats the wax of the hive. And so she got rid of these little parasites and she chucked them into a bag. And then she checked the bag an hour later and found a little hole in it. And she thought, oh, okay. That means... So she sort of put two and two together and she figured out... And she did a few more experiments and found out that, yes, the worms were actually eating through the plastic. The way they discovered that... The way they sort of determined that it wasn't because they were just chewing holes rather than actually digesting the plastic was they crushed up worms and sort of into a slurry and put that onto plastic, and the same thing happened. So obviously the jaws of the things,
they weren't actually eating it, but they were just
they weren't eating it. There's something in the worms that was breaking it down. So it's an enzyme of some kind. So and like we were talking about the previous study where this sort of went a bit haywire all over social media. This story did a little bit as well. Worms will save us from plastic. No. So
don't tell me it's a bit more complicated than that.
Oh, well, really? Yeah, I know, right? Why do facts always complicate things? They're so boring.
Alternative
facts. Yeah. Anyway, look, it would take about 100 worms a month to break down a 5.5 gram plastic bag. If you were just using worms, so.
So it's going to take a while, but
and a lot of worms. I mean, one bag, 100 worms. And someone pointed out quite facetiously. I hope it was facetiously that this is not great because this could, bees are already dying, so this could be even worse for bees because these waxworms invade beehives, and this could be really bad. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's not the take-home message here, I don't think.
Okay, so we farm them, but then we crush them before they can get out and kill the bees, and that.
Well, yeah, apparently. Yeah. yeah, cool, and have just like loads of worm juice just floating everywhere. Sounds great.
Just sprinkle it over the plastic.
What's really cool about this is that what is actually really quite interesting about this is that polyethylene in plastics is notoriously hard to break down because it's an oil-based product, and there's no bacteria known that can really break this stuff down until now. It's postulated that this could actually be, instead of being the worms degrading it. Now, the worms do feed on wax, which has a similar kind of molecular structure to polyethylene. But someone's postulated that, this could be a bacterium that's living inside the gut of the worm, which happens in quite a lot of insects. A lot of insects have symbiotic relationships with bacteria in their gut that break down certain things that they can't break down. So it could be something similar here. And if so, instead of trying to grow these damn worms up, why don't we grow the bacterium up? Or, even better, take the gene that's producing the enzyme, find it first, obviously, because they still don't know what the genetic basis of this is. But do a bit more work on this and, clone the gene and grow up the enzyme in massive batches. Which is, or yeast cells or whatever, grow it in massive batches, and that's how you break down plastic. That would actually be a much more, it's a more feasible way of doing it, I think, rather than dumping loads of worms all over your plastic bags. So, but it's really cool. I mean, I do like this story because it shows how sort of a little accidental study, just an observation, can lead into something that, hey, maybe we could figure this out and work on it. And I really hope that they find out they will find out how the mechanism is working. I just hope that it becomes something that's viable to use, because it could actually help us. I mean, another thing someone pointed out was, this is lots of money just down the drain. Like, plastics are very expensive, and it's basically a gold mine. Yeah, but it's not really a gold mine at the moment. It's just being recycled, or it's clogging up waterways. If we're lucky, yeah, and it's mostly just clogging up waterways. So it's talk about the wasted potential. It's the same thing, really. So,
I guess also, and we probably don't know this yet, but what does it break it down to? I mean,
don't know.
What does it degrade to?
Yeah.
Does it become oil or something, or some other
what are the end
trace
products? Yeah,
carbon?
I'm not sure. I can let me just see. Let me just squeeze this. I don't think they know, and that's the point, because all they've discovered is that, well, we know the worms are harboring some sort of enzyme that's degrading it. What it's degrading to, who knows? So yeah,
could be one of those miraculous.
No, sorry, I'm wrong. It actually dissolved into ethylene glycol, which is
what, like antifreeze?
Yeah, antifreeze.
Okay.
So
well, that's useful.
There's obviously, yeah. Well, I guess. Yeah, whether that would be a better thing to have floating in your waterways than plastics, I don't know, but it's an interesting little study anyway.
It's a long way from being anything useful right now, but it's a direction that we might be able to go down.
Exactly, yeah. And in some ways, it just sort of shows me how interesting the natural world is, and that there's always an enzyme that can break down something that we made.
There's always an enzyme. Sounds like not a band name, maybe a movie name or something. There's always an enzyme. It's very cool. It's something to keep an eye on. Now, Penny, there's nothing new about females faking it, but a new paper published in the journal Ecology finds that female dragonflies are faking their own deaths in order to get away from horny males. That's pretty extreme.
It is pretty extreme. And I think some of the reporting on this has been interesting.
Bit of similarities to human behaviour being made, some anthropomorphisation.
Yeah. Look, personally, looking at it, I have never faked my own death for that reason. Like, just
good to know.
Like,
no, I'm fairly sure most women probably wish they had. Anyway.
Anyway.
This is getting into very dangerous territory.
Yeah, true.
However, it is an interesting part of animal behaviour and an interesting observation. So these dragonflies, the moorland hawker dragonflies that live in the Swiss Alps, have this behaviour, and why do they do it? And I think it's something that kind of, I suspect this may be in the running for an ignoble. What do you reckon?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'd say so. Yeah.
It's like, if it's not, no one's going to say, no, Penny, you're being crazy. No way. But what is going on? So this was an observation by a biologist called Rasim Khalifa, and he saw a lady dragonfly being pursued by a male, and she had already mated. She was going to a pond to lay her eggs, and this biologist saw the female crash down to the ground. The male was like, she's dead, flew off. And then she got up and went on her merry way. And I think that's quite interesting. But the point is to explain this behaviour, and it's kind of funny, is that mating is a risky business for the female dragonfly. So in this population of dragonflies, there can be an oversupply of males. They're very aggressive in terms of mating with a female. But from the female's point of view, once she has mated once, she's got enough sperm to fertilise all her eggs. So really for her, that's it. She just wants to do it once, and she's going to go to somewhere else and lay her eggs, and
And she stores reserves of the sperm, is that right?
Yeah, so she doesn't need multiple matings to get enough for her eggs. And apparently for this species, a mating is actually quite a bit risky for the female, because the point of the male penis in this species, it doesn't just transfer sperm, but it also removes sperm that are left in her storage organ, like you said. So it's they kind of sweep it out, which I'm guessing is a bit risky in terms of her eggs, but also in terms of her, her livelihood. So I guess in that context, a female dragonfly who mates once fakes her death and then goes and peacefully lays all her eggs elsewhere is probably much more likely to pass on her DNA than one who
is traumatized during the sex,
or like her experiences like another mating, which it traumatizes her body more, scoops out sperm, maybe scoops out egg, who knows.
Yeah.
So I have to confess, I clicked on this I was reading it for the funny headline, and I thought, it's actually kind of interesting because it seems to be quite a complex behaviour. And it also seems like, the death fake and lying upside down, motionless on the ground and being alert and aware the whole time because she stays motionless while the male's still hovering around. But if something else comes, off she goes. Like, I just didn't realise dragonflies were that smart.
It's not easy being a woman no matter what species you are, just about.
I mean, obviously innate behaviour and, something worked and it got passed along as a behaviour that happens when you don't want to be pursued. So, it is.
Sometimes it's okay to be the woman if you're a spider and you get to eat your male's partner's head off afterwards or during.
No, that's the praying mantis.
Yeah, I wonder.
Praying mantis, is it? Okay. And there's octopuses.
The black widow?
I thought it was a spider, but it could be.
I think some male spiders do get actually devoured at the end.
Yeah, I'm pretty. Yeah,
especially if they're a lot smaller than the females, which is actually quite often the case.
Remember, I'm sure we did a story about this, and it's like their gift, like the bit of extra nutrition to get her through the pregnancy, so to speak. It's beneficial for the male.
That's so romantic.
Doesn't anglerfish also do something similar? Like basically, those hideous fish that live in the deep ocean. Like I think the males basically burrow themselves into the female and sort of latch onto her as a ride and then basically become subsumed by her. It's something weird like that.
All right. Nature is red in tooth and claw. It's a nasty place for everything. But speaking of dead things, Shane, when it comes to extracting DNA from ancient Neanderthals or other prehistoric animals, we usually have to find the bones first. But a team led by Viviane Slon from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has managed to extract and sequence the DNA of ancient animals from sediment that's up to 240,000 years old. DNA found in the dirt, not in bones.
Yeah, this is actually, for some reason this amazed me. I'm not sure why it amazed me, considering that I used to do similar things on soil bacteria. Basically take a gram of soil and extract DNA from it, and Bob's your uncle. You've got potentially a million bacterial species that you can sit there and sequence. But I suppose what's more amazing about this is that this is DNA that's extracted from soil where there might not even be remains left. Basically, anywhere where we think these humanoids might have lived, they've left their DNA everywhere. And we do the same thing as we go through life. We shed DNA all the time. So potentially, in a couple of million years' time, our DNA might be, picked up by our descendants and sequenced in a similar sort of way, I guess. Yeah, it's really cool. So I think they found the Denisovans this way from memory, because there's actually there are very few or no fossils of the Denisovans at all.
I think it's like 3 fragments, a little bit of a jaw and a toe or something.
But yeah, so basically this researcher Slon has actually found Denisovan DNA in sediment, far older than any of that's right, older than any of the fossils that they've actually found. So it shows that we can track these things, and this actually circumvents the whole problem we have with the fossil record and how incomplete it is. Because now, if we can say, if our technique is that sensitive that we can pick up DNA that might have been shed by where they lived, and we know, and we have something to compare it to, that's amazing. It could solve a whole lot of problems, like, the whole out of Africa hypothesis and all the rest of it, where the branches were, where they lived. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually just quite amazed that the technique is this sensitive. Apparently, they use mitochondrial DNA because it's quite common, and it's also a lot more stable than normal chromosomal DNA.
Mm-hmm.
But it's but I don't really have what else to offer really, because it actually just fascinates me that they can do this.
It is very cool. There's a great quote from Jennifer Raff, who studies DNA at the University of Kansas, but she was not involved in the study. She was reading through the paper, and her notes are full of exclamation marks. Woolly rhinoceros, woolly mammoth, cave bear, Neanderthal, Denisopus. She's like so excited about all the different things that they were able to find in 240,000-year-old sediments. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm just reading the abstract of this paper that they released, and it sounds so dry, but it's actually so amazing. You know, using targeted enrichment of mitochondrial DNA, we show the cave sediments represent a rich source of ancient mammalian DNA that often includes traces of hominid DNA, even at sites and in layers where there are no hominid remains. So that shows you just how good this technique is.
Right.
You know, if there's no bones, whatever, we can find the DNA. And what really is impressive about this is that, like, I looked up the half-life of DNA, and it's about 521 years. So, so basically Jurassic Park is out of the question, because based on that,
unusable after about 1 million years or so?
No, apparently, technically, it could, from one source I read, up to 6.8 million years. That might be the extreme cutoff.
Right, yeah.
So we could go back to that point. Like
in an ice core or something.
Yeah, or something like that. Or even just based on the breakdown of the DNA fragment, like if you wanted to get enough information to go from there. But, so 6.8 million years might be the cutoff. But even so, that's a very, very long time.
It is.
And as far as I'm aware, they've only managed to extract DNA from sediments up to 240,000 years old so far. But that doesn't mean that they can't get better.
Sure.
Go back even further.
As technology improves, as the technique gets better. Very cool. I just love that you can find... I mean, we talked not so long ago about a cave, I think it was in France, that they showed signs of fire and that had been used, and no one had been there for 100,000 years or something. They didn't find any bones, I don't think, but they found, some skin from bear, clothes made of bear skin and that. But you'd probably maybe be able to then look and find some dirt and get some actual DNA of the people who were living there, maybe.
They could probably even find another bear skin.
Yeah.
To be honest. Like, if it's that sensitive. I mean, soil is not exactly the most forgiving place when it comes to DNA, because soil's just full of, enzymes that break down stuff all the time. So if DNA can persist that long in soil, I don't see why it can't persist on bear skins. And,
Very cool. Yeah. It's something to keep an eye on, because there's going to be lots of other exciting discoveries based on this, I think. It's very cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's about it. If you want any more information about the stories we talked about, or if you want to get in touch, just head to scienceontop.com/263. Also, have a look at our social media sites and leave us a comment on the website. Don't forget, of course, you can head to scienceontop.com/donate to pledge us some money. You can pay on a per episode basis. You can limit how much you pay each month. So we're very grateful to everyone who's chipped in to help us pay the bills and keep the show on the road. And thank you for joining me today, Shane and Penny.
No worries.
Thanks, Ed.
This episode was edited with nefarious gallantry by Marcos Benamu. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
People have any concerns, they should consult a professional.
I think if you do have some hesitations in regards to sugar substitutes, talk to a registered dietitian or your primary care physician.
The study did not prove cause and effect, meaning people may already be at risk for stroke or dementia despite their diet soda consumption. Mary, back to you.
Still, it does make me think about picking up my Diet Coke. Tracy, thank you. Researchers say more needs to be done to further understand those links.